Hello and welcome to Loose Carry. I'm your host, Phoenix Trinidad. This is Zero Tackle's weekly NRL show. We talk about everything that happened on the weekend and we look ahead to round 5. This week we're also talking about Jamal Fogarty and where his future lies, and should the NRL introduce a 5-point try? Probably not. There's a little bit of discussion about that. Some differing opinions as always, but it's a big episode. We try to fit a lot in. Let's get to it. And joining us, as always, on this week for Loose Carry, we have Zero Tackle analyst Darren Parkin. How are you, mate?
Going very well, mate. Nice to be here. Another intriguing weekend of results and some curious injuries to sort of hit a few sides in the run as well.
Yeah, we're getting into that point of the season. And the next guest we have is the man that keeps Zero Tackle running, Scott Pryde. How are you, mate?
Well, Phoenix, even better now that the Dragons have actually got a win on the board. So, great week.
Classic. And making his Loose Carry debut, another writer from zerotackle.com, Ethan Lee Chalk. How are you, buddy? Welcome.
Great to be here, guys. I just wish the weather went away in Sydney. Can't wait for some hot, warm weather soon.
Beautiful. All right, let's get to it. All right, so first thing on the rundown, Scott, Rabbitohs giving the Panthers their third loss in a row. So they have to be in your top 8 by this point, surely.
They're getting closer, aren't they? I said on this show pre-season that I couldn't see the Rabbitohs anywhere near the top 8, let alone in contention for it. And my view on that has certainly changed now. They've been very impressive the last couple of weeks. And I think if there's any coach that could have found a way to do this, it was Wayne Bennett. I did say that pre-season, and he's certainly finding a way. Their injuries, I thought, were going to cruel them, but they haven't. Jai Gray, what a player! He's been phenomenal the last couple of weeks in sort of getting South Sydney to a point. And whether they can keep it going is anyone's guess, given their injuries. I think things will catch up with them in the coming weeks. But great performances from South Sydney. They're 3 from 4, and it's hard to see where those wheels are going to fall off now. But Penrith, on the other hand, they're in some trouble, aren't they? Their defence has just been awful, hasn't it, Ethan?
I guess the thing that people have to take into account with the Penrith Panthers is there was no Nathan Cleary, there was no Dylan Edwards. And when you take those two players out of the equation, there's always going to be some younger players that they probably have to rely on. And you look at some of them, you look at Trent Talau, did Blaze end up playing? Or was he was admitted at the last moment, wasn't he? So they've got to rely on the younger players, and unfortunately they didn't stand up. But even though I think it's their third loss in a row, I don't think you have to worry if you're a Penrith fan. I'll throw this one to Darren now. And on a Nathan Cleary, we saw how big a loss he was to the Penrith Panthers. You got no Jerome Luai there anymore. Who kind of needs to stand up in his place if Penrith are to make it 5 in a row?
Well, that's the problem a little bit about what we were talking about in the off-season. It's the balance that your depth players have to have, and people have picked away at the fringes or teams have picked away at the fringes of the Panthers gradually as they win titles. People pull some of these guys out of the edges of those sides who have been contributors, and all of a sudden those guys, instead of being contributors, now have to be leaders and try to drive that bus. And some of the numbers on that, as we were talking about, so 22 or more points in a row in all 4 games this season. They actually did it in both their pre-season matches as well, which doesn't matter per se in terms of results, but it did set the scene a little bit. They won one of those matches and dropped the other. It's their longest run since 6 in a row in rounds 5 to 10 of 2019. So that was obviously just before they exploded as a side. Obviously Sorensen getting concussed is another one that goes out of the lineup as well. And it really just becomes a point where, younger players are being asked to be ready to take on senior leadership roles when they haven't had to do it in the past, and they're only human, Penrith. I think they'll be okay. I think they'll find their feet. It's just a question of whether they find their feet when they're 3 and 6 and end up finishing 5th, 6th, 7th on the table and can't contend anymore. So, that's the challenge that sits in front of them. But you'd still be brave to write them off. I think there's mitigating factors, there's reasons why it's happening, and I think they'll shake their way out of that. It's just whether they do it in time.
Yep, so another big one on the weekend, the Bulldogs downing the Sharks 22-6. So, Ethan, you were actually at that game. So, what was your big takeaway from that? The Doggies are looking as good as they've ever looked.
I was, first off, I'm going to say what an atmosphere it is to be at Shark Park. Amazing. Surprisingly, no rain for most of the match, which was quite good. Packed out stadium. I can't wait to see it when all the renovations are done. Now on to the game, Darren and Scott. Brilliant performance by the Bulldogs. It just shows, I think 2 years ago, they were sitting near the bottom of the table and everyone had their doubts about Cameron Serrado and kind of all the younger players coming through. And now there's no worries at all. I think you mentioned before, Darren, first time the Bulldogs are coming first since 1993.
Yeah, first 4-0 start, yeah.
First 4-0 start. That's an amazing performance. And it's not even, they still have Matt Burden out. They still got Samuel Hughes out. They've got Jacob Carraz out. They've got Viliami Kikau out. I think they've, all in all, they have $3 million on their injury bench. It just shows that they have that next man up attitude. You got Bailey Hayward. Harry Hayes made a great try-saving tackle there. You had Jack Todd, who made his debut. Brilliant guy as well. And then the players just stand up in their absence. Like, it's pretty hard to pinpoint one specific player that really took the game on and took control of the game. It was pretty much a whole round team effort, which was amazing. And it just shows that they're probably, at the moment, one of the early premiership contenders for the 2025 title. I've got a question for you now, Darren. We'll step away from the Bulldogs and look at Cronulla. It just seems as though that they can't stand up in the big matches, whether it be finals or against a quality opposition like the Bulldogs, Penrith, or the Rabbitohs. What do you kind of take away from that match, and how much struggles have you seen them not only this year but over the past few years when it comes to versing that quality opposition?
Yeah, it felt like there was a bit of a turning point for them last year when they beat the Storm away and they had, a couple of guys out in that particular game. But since then, yeah, that was the talk in the finals. The top four with the Sharks and the Roosters weren't able to compete with the Storm and the Panthers. And obviously the Roosters were expected to drop away this year, but the Sharks were expected to contend. I think a lot of people tipped them in Vegas thinking that, as much as they might have only had an extra week's prep, they were healthier seemingly than Penrith going into that game. And they weren't awful, but again, they couldn't get the job done in that one. Then they play a side that's very much on the up. The Bulldogs were exciting last season. They made the finals for the first time in 6 or 7 years and looked like they were really pushing forward. And yeah, at this stage, the Sharks are getting asked some of those questions in big games and they're just not quite getting through it. That they've got the capabilities to do so. And I think a lot of people actually tipped them to, if the Storm were the premiership favourites, a lot of people thought that maybe the Sharks would go past Penrith as well and be the biggest threat to them. But yeah, they're just not delivering on that at the moment, and they got tactically shut out in that game, and the spread of contributions, as you said, from the Bulldogs was fantastic, and they deserve to be firmly in the hunt for top four and possibly even something beyond that. But yeah, that's the elephant in the room for the Sharks, is when they've been set those challenges, they've unfortunately been found wanting too often.
Staying on the Sharks, I've got to admit, one positive that you can really take away from that game and the start of the season is the recruitment of Adam Fanua-Blake from the New Zealand Warriors. He just really is that hard-working prop and explosive middle player that they really need. And I guess if he has players around, I think you get Tom Hazelton back soon. If you get Oregon Kafusi firing and some of the other players here and there, they might be a real threat when it comes to the middle, which they've really lacked in recent years. But I guess going to you now again, Darren, they've got some players off contract. I think they got Will Kennedy off contract. Daniel Atkinson's leaving at the end of the year. A few others thereabouts. Do you reckon this is the last kind of season they have in that premiership window?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, obviously you can regenerate, but yeah, in terms of age profile, and if you look at some of those sides around them that are a little bit younger than they are, and I guess the issue that they're going to face, so they're 2-2 I think now, and tricky little period on the road for them to come. Obviously the Raiders never an easy place to play. They've got a clash in Perth with Manly, I think it is. Knights away can be a little bit plucky, and a couple of others, and I think their next couple of home fixtures, they should beat Parramatta, and then they've got the Storm in the middle of the year. So, they're probably a 50-50 prospect almost looking across those games. So, they don't want to be 5-5 and trying to launch in the second half of the season.
So another interesting one from the weekend, Darren. So the Broncos, clearly they're flying. They're down the Dolphins by 8 points. So on the Dolphins side of things, what happens if they lose next week?
Yeah, obviously they've got the Titans, who are only tipped to have a modest campaign, so it's a highly winnable game for them. And if you contrast it to the back end of last season when the Dolphins beat the Broncos were probably cooked by then, but that was the official nail in the coffin where they obviously beat the, squeezed it out in terms of the big brother, so to speak. And Broncos confirming that they're back on track. They had that little hiccup in round 2, but have otherwise been fairly strong to start the season. But yeah, the Dolphins fixture is not great beyond that contest. Obviously winnable next week, but they've got the Panthers, who should have a couple of players back, certainly Edwards and Cleary by then. Storm, obviously a difficult task, very difficult to beat Canberra away the following week. Magic round against the Roosters, who, that's winnable. It's in their home city. Eels winnable, Warriors winnable, etc. But there's certainly a chance to drop the 3 immediately after the Titans game, which would have them 0-8, I would think, Scott, if it fell that way. Now, obviously, first-year coach, I don't think he's going to be under the cosh too much, but there are some people suggesting that degree of pressure, but I would think that there's going to be a degree of grace period. And if you look at his record over in the UK, he did have a similar period where he was able to turn the fortunes around of his side, so could well do it again.
Yeah, I mean, Christian Wilk is not going to be under pressure anytime soon for his job, at least. Let's get that one clear. But certainly if they go 0-8, the questions are going to start, and rightly so. NRL coaching is a results-driven business. I think one thing that is a positive for Christian Wilk and the Dolphins is that he's not seemingly buying into the pressure. Obviously, the Dolphins signed Francis Molo from the St George Illawarra Dragons last week. Good signing. If he gets back to his best, he was an Origin player once upon a time. But pleasingly, I think from a Dolphins point of view, was that Wolf, after the game against the Broncos, actually said he's not going to rush Molo into the side. He understands that Molo hasn't actually trained with a team in 7 or 8 weeks. Obviously, there's been those ongoing issues at the Dragons. And what that means to me is that Wolf's still thinking very clearly about what's happening in Redcliffe. He's not going to make a rash decision and do something silly that could actually upset the balance of the side even further than where it already is. I think he very clearly admitted in that press conference that things are frustrating. It's hard to be losing all the time, but they are getting closer. I think they were better against the Broncos. They were certainly better than they have been the opening 2 weeks, the week before that as well. So things are turning for the Dolphins. They're going to need some luck from somewhere, and you're right, that game against the Titans is almost must-win territory, because if you go 0-8, you pretty much write your season off before it really gets going. But I think there are positives in the way that Wolf is dealing with the situation. Whether Molo can make much of a difference once he does get into that side, up for debate. But certainly some positives to take out of it.
Yeah, lots of positives there. Scott, I'm going to stay with you because speaking of positives, the Dragons, 14 over the Storm, who scored 8 points. Is that their best defensive performance ever?
I can't remember a better one. Certainly the Dragons beat Melbourne in Melbourne last year as well, and that was a great effort, but this one trumps that. Melbourne had, I think, 48 tackles in Melbourne, in the Dragons 20, and only scored 1 try. So, I mean, I know the weather wasn't great, but the Dragons just kept turning up for each other. There's areas of the Dragons game that still needs improvement. They put themselves under a lot of pressure with silly errors, and certainly their midfield defence at times wasn't amazing, but on the goal line, they just kept on turning up and getting the job done. Melbourne should have scored a number of tries. They were there and thereabouts, but certainly the experience that Shane Flanagan went out and bought over the off-season. He bought in Clint Gufferson and Damien Cook, obviously Valentine Holmes as well. He's an Origin player, and then David Clemmer to boot in the last couple of weeks. All 4 of those guys are pretty strong in that game, and you can just see their influence is rubbing off on some of the younger players in the team. I thought Dylan Egan's debut was sensational off the bench. He really flipped the game in that second half for the Dragons, and I think a lot of that comes down to the experienced heads putting that, or easing the pressure on the younger guys in that team. As I said, still plenty for the Dragons to work on, but I think it was a great performance, and the defence on the goal line, as I said, absolutely tremendous. But there's issues there for Melbourne as well. As I said, 48 tackles in the Dragons 20, and they only scored 1 try. Ethan, I mean, where do you see Melbourne going from there? Because certainly they seem to miss Jerome Hughes in that game enormously.
Yeah, first off, great performance by the Dragons. I'm going to give that one to you, Scott. I know you're a massive Dragons fan, so great performance by them. Really showed it. Gutherson, Holmes really stood up, especially Griffin Little coming off the bench there. Melbourne, it's a hard one for Melbourne because when you look at their team that they played against the Dragons, they obviously the big loss of Jerome Hughes, Dalian winner. But they also had a bunch of other players out as well. They had Solomon out. I think they had Nick Meaney out as well. A couple of others coming in. That probably wasn't their first grade side. So I don't think there's too much to worry about Melbourne. They already proved themselves against Penrith. They've proved themselves week in, week out. I guess the question moving forward is if Jerome Hughes does miss a lot of weeks, can they rely on someone like Tyron Wishart, which probably, all props to him, he's a great utility off the bench, but probably didn't have the best game against the Dragons. They've also got Jonah Pezzett, came through the Queensland Cup, North Sydney Bears, New South Wales Cup on the weekend, but I think he got injured. I may be mistaken. I think it's slight knee injury. So it's really goes down to if Hughes gets injured, which is very unlikely considering his past injury history, who will really step up and take his place. I'll throw this one to Darren now quickly. If Hughes does get injured, how much of a loss is that to Melbourne? I know, hypothetically speaking, if Hughes does go down for a significant portion of time, how much of an effect will that have on the Melbourne Storm?
Yeah, there's a couple of layers, even psychologically. As Scott pointed to, they were unusually inefficient when they had opportunities in their attacking zone, and a lot of it's to do with that. I mean, Wishart generally gets that first crack. There's a bit on him as well because he's trying to demonstrate either to Melbourne or to someone else that he can obviously be a starter and a regular fixture and someone that they can build a little bit of that around. But you also show a few cracks to the opposition by saying, well, if this player's down, they can be a little bit not one-dimensional, but a little bit vulnerable or gettable in that area. We saw their forward pack probably for the only time last season was on grand final night when they got squeezed a little bit. So, yeah, I think a lot of those guys, I mean, Pezzett coming back from injuries on and off over the course of the last couple of years and Wishart getting that first opportunity, they've got to demonstrate that they can not just be bench players, but fill the void for, in the horrible event, for example, that Hughes did an ACL, and we're talking about a year out of the game, which touchwood doesn't happen. So, yeah, there's a few layers to it, and I think a few opposition sides would look at it and go, okay, well, there's some chinks in that armour.
Yeah, well, speaking of layers, so on Sunday afternoon, we saw probably two of the most talked about teams face off. So Manly and the Eels, Manly getting over the Eels in 26-12. So Scott, let's start with Tom Trbojevic. He's injured again. How did they handle that?
Yeah, massive blow for Manly, obviously. Tom Trbojevic just can't seem to stay fit. You feel for the guy because, as Anthony Seibold said in his presser yesterday, he works hard, he does all his prep, and for whatever reason, his body just fails him time and time again. This time it's an MTL. Looks like he'll be out for anywhere up to 6 weeks. Manly will obviously be hoping it's less than that, given his importance to the side. But also, I think the Sea Eagles are in a far better position to deal with a Tom Trbojevic absence than they have been in previous seasons. I think the emergence of Lehigh Opawade is excellent. He was really strong yesterday during the second half after being moved to the back, and now with proper preparation time and knowing he's going to be the fullback for the next 6 weeks, I think he could take his game to another level in the next month and a half. And it could actually pave the way for the long-term move for Tom Trbojevic that seems to have been floated in the last week or so. Potentially he goes to 5'8" long-term, and I think that'd be good for his health. Obviously, not as much running in the front line as there is at fullback, and Lehigh Opawade is a player that Manly will want to sign long-term, and I think the only way they're going to do that or keep him at the club for good is to have him as a fullback rather than a winger. So that's a positive. Obviously, the shuffle yesterday saw Ruben Garrick go back to the wing as well. I personally think that's actually his best position. So whether that stays the course over the coming weeks, I'm not sure. But I think Manly are in a better position to deal with it than they have been. That said, we all know the influence that Tom Trbojevic has against the top teams. He's an absolute freak of nature, really, with a ball in hand. And obviously defensively, he brings experience that Leo Pryde doesn't have, both in terms of safety under the high ball and setting up the defensive line. We know how important fullbacks are in that space. So some issues for Manly for sure, but as I said, I think they're in a better position to handle it. What might throw a spanner in the works here really is the whole Daly Cherry Evans situation that's bubbling along in the background. And how much is that going to affect the club in the next couple of weeks, Ethan?
Wow. When his name is in the headlines for 24/7 over the whole entire week, he really did show an amazing performance. I think he picked up all 6 Dally M votes. It just shows that he is still one of the most elite playmakers in the competition. I guess many people going into the match thought he was going to get booed, just like Josh Adokar did the other week at Combank Stadium when he was versing the Bulldogs again, like many players do when they're versing their former team. But instead, the crowd absolutely applauded the hell out of him, and damn right they should. 2011 Premiership winner, a staple of their team, knocks back the offer from the Titans years ago to remain at the Northern Beaches, one club player. He really deserves the crowd to not turn on him, and I'm very happy as a supporter and as a journalist as well they didn't. Looking now towards the future, I don't think he will play a heavy role on the Sea Eagles. I think he's one of those players where, he came out early in the start of the season to admit that he's not staying at the Northern Beaches. He's turned down the offer. I think he's done it that early so the rest of the team and himself can focus on the big picture, and that is winning the 2025 grand final. An interesting press conference, to say the least, after the game. I'll hit this one straight back at you, Scott. What did you make of that press conference? It sure was interesting. Would you say him taking shots at the media, at club officials, at people on the board, at just different people inside the Manly Sea Eagles organisation? What did you kind of make from that press conference? Because it sure was damn hell of a good listen.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard a captain speak so much in the press. Anthony Seibold might as well have not been there. Very interesting. He's very clearly frustrated with the way it's played out in the media this week. Granted, he's one of the highest paid players in the game. He's got 330 games under his belt. If he thought it was going to play out any other way, he's probably, I don't know what word to use, but it was always going to play out in the media. That's the media's job, and it was always going to go that way. But yeah, an intriguing press conference. He mentioned, I think it was mentioned to him, and he sort of agreed with it, that there was a bit of a smear campaign around, whether he'd fallen out with the Sea Eagles or not, which, I'm not going to read too much into that. I don't know what the answer is, and you'd be foolish to say that you do, I think, at this stage. But I think the one thing about Cherry Evans is he's very well spoken. He goes into every media commitment with an idea of what he's going to say and what message he wants to get across. And he clearly did that after the game yesterday, and did it in a controlled manner, without directly throwing any names under the bus. He certainly made it clear that he wasn't happy. And I do wonder, I do agree with you, that it probably won't have too much of an impact on the club. But if he's not happy, and if things do continue to play out in the next couple of weeks with Manly officials or whoever in the media, I just wonder how much of an impact that's going to have. And I don't know if you've got any insights there, Darren, as to just how things might turn for Manly if this continues to play out.
Yeah, there's the benefit of things happening early, but then there's a downside of it where you've got to sit on it for a very long time. And clearly there are some people that aren't thrilled. So if you're talking about smear campaigns and conversations being leaked from even a couple of years ago, I think it was mentioned from 2023 and some of those as well, that it becomes potentially problematic. And if you drop a couple of games, that sort of gets heightened. So I thought he handled it quite well, but not everybody has by the looks of it, and not everybody's absolutely on the same page. So they've got to make sure they keep whatever relationships need to be harmonious as they can as they attempt to win a title.
Well, if there's one positive to take out from this happening early in the season, is that we're going to have something to talk about pretty much every week for the rest of the year. So moving on now, Scott, to the MRC and the judiciary inconsistency.
Yeah, I don't want to harp on about this too much because it's been, everyone's got their own opinion on it. But for me, there's some real issues, and there has been for a number of years, around which tackles seemingly get charged with grade 2s and above, which lead to suspensions, and which tackles are grade 1s and lead to fines. I've got no issue with the system in place and the fact that grade 1 offences get fines, because I think we were at a point before fines became introduced that we're at a point where there just were too many suspensions and players were sitting out of the game for very minor offences. So I'm glad they took steps to address that, and I think the system we have now works to an extent. But when you've got seemingly the people in charge not able to make consistent decisions around which tackles are which, it does leave you scratching your head. I know Omre Gula's crusher on the weekend was, it was a penalty, sure, but I'm not sure it really should have gone any further than that. He's now looking at a 3-week suspension. Obviously, his past record comes into that. He's got 3 offences on his record already. If it was a first offence, it probably would have been, I think it would have been a fine or only 1 week. Instead, he gets 3 weeks. Whereas you look at Reid Marnie, who was charged twice in the same game for direct contact to the head on 2 occasions, and he's come away with 2 grade 1 charges and 2 fines. So I just think there are some issues around the consistency and around which offences are garnering which charges, and maybe the system does need a slight shake-up in terms of the penalties for certain offences, and players potentially getting charged twice in the same game needs to be dealt with a little bit harsher as well, particularly when they were almost the same offence from Marnie. He did the same thing twice. But yeah, I mean, I just think there's some issues there around the consistency. Ethan, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on that Jerome Luai's tackle from last night, which we've now learned is leading to a suspension.
Yeah, well, I don't want to bag the officials at all, but throw this back to you or Darren, and I want everyone to answer this. And I know there's inconsistencies in the game, and I understand that Jerome may have been suspended, and I think looking at a 1 week, 2 week suspension. But how does he stay on the field? How does he not get sent to the sin bin? How does he not get sent off? Like, how do you get suspended for a tackle like that and still stay on the field? It's just absurd. And we've seen that we've seen that a couple of weeks as well, where someone stays on the field and, the next morning you throw up the MRC charges and they're off for 1, 2 or 3 weeks. It's like, if it was that bad of a tackle, and which some of them are, so I'm not disagreeing with any of them, but shouldn't they be sent to the sin bin in the game? So, yeah. Darren, did you want to take this?
Yeah, that's one area where, say, the NRL's generally had it a bit better than the AFL. There's always been a theory that, let's say you take a player out of the game with a hit or something crude and you end up getting suspended for it. Other clubs, obviously, get the benefit of that suspension. The sides you play in the next 2 to 3 weeks, your opponents who you played that day are hamstrung by the injury or whatever occurred. So there's always been a school of thought, yes, in terms of the, getting those right, the send-offs first of all, so that you're without that player on that day and it affects you in that game against that team. But the other left field idea is that at least one of the matches you're suspended for should be the next time you play that side. So I don't know what you feel about that, Scott. Let's say you get a 3-week suspension. Should you serve 2 and then hold the 3rd one over until next time you play the same opponent?
Well, that's an interesting school of thought that I haven't actually heard before. I think there is a tricky element to that where if you get suspended in the last round of not the last round of the season, but even mid-season where you're not going to play that team again, I think that is a potential issue. I don't know where I sit on that. But yeah, I think the disconnect between the MRC and the judiciary is certainly an issue. Sorry, MRC and the bunker is certainly an issue.
So another one for you, Darren. So Jamal Fogarty's future is in a little bit of doubt. What are his options there? So should the Raiders keep him as their club option, basically?
Yeah, it's been blown up by a few different things. Obviously, the DCE news at Manly has brought it into the focus a little bit with them. And at the same time, obviously, round 6 is drawing near. It's one of those situations where you've got the player clause. So he's off contract end of next year, so end of 2026. But there is a clause in place that he can be released from that by the Raiders by round 6, and then I think he would then have 14 weeks to decide what he wanted to do beyond that point as well. Now, he did put his hand up in the pre-season and say a couple of months ago that he wanted to explore some options. The Raiders said no, but now it feels like they're a little bit more open to those conversations, and Manly have made no secret of the fact they're going to lose DCE for next year, that Fogarty is an option potentially for them. So it is approaching crunch time for all parties to make a decision there. And I get the feeling if Ricky Stewart's giving that blessing that we might see him running around with the Sea Eagles when that opportunity comes. Ethan, do you sort of read it that way?
I guess it's a hard decision for the Raiders and Ricky Stewart. Like, Jamal Fogarty is aged like fine wine. He's gotten better with age every single season. And it's kind of hard. You got Ethan Sanders waiting in the wings as well, signed from the Parramatta Eels, great young player, under 19s, Blues representative, got a big future ahead of him. It's an interesting one. Like, do you go one more season and he continues his form, or is one season too much? And then, like, you just have this player in the reserve grade with Sanders taking over. For me personally, if I was Jamal Fogarty, you would take that lucrative deal at the Manly Sea Eagles if they offer you more money and more years, just considering his age, and you probably don't know how much longer he has left in the NRL. But it's tipsy and turvy for the Raiders. Like, you can go either way, and fans probably won't be upset either way because you got Sanders coming in, magnificent player if anyone gets to watch any of the New South Wales Cup games. Made his NRL debut last year for the Eels, but probably didn't showcase his potential. And you got Chevy Stewart as well, waiting in the wings at the fullback position. So they got time and they got plenty of potential in their squad. One thing I do know, though, about Ricky Stewart is that he won't rush anyone. So he said it openly before. He won't rush any players. You got Cook as well, who's a clear backup. So he won't rush anyone. So if Fogarty plays one more year at the Raiders, I think good decision. If he moves to Manly, good decision. Moving to you, Darren. If Fogarty doesn't join the Manly Sea Eagles, they've been linked to Adam Reynolds. They've been linked to Kieran Foran. You got Joey Walsh there. You got Onatoni Large. You got a bunch of players you can push Turbo into the 5/8 role, move Luke Brooks to halfback. Who would you kind of pick to replace Cherry Evans if Fogarty is not the answer?
The whispers are that the Reynolds option might be off the table, so obviously that's one less option for them to probably pursue, and then obviously they've got that a fair bit of money in the old war chest to sort of put out there. Given there's been speculation of 1.4 was thrown at DCE and knocked back, so there's a bit of money on the table for them, and I think they're going to be a fairly attractive commodity given, the way they're performing and how close they're going to be to the mark. But I do think that somebody like Fogarty, in terms of opportunity, time left, and those sorts of things, would probably remain the best prospect. It feels like the best option for all parties. It's an interesting one because Canberra have to make the first move because they knock that back. He can't talk to anybody until they make a decision. So, there's probably informal conversations. Doesn't mean his manager can't or his agent can't, but he can't enter into anything formal in terms of those discussions. So, I think that's where we'll end up. But the ball's in the Raiders' court. Yep.
Okay, so this one's a fun one that we've just put down here. So Andrew Johns has come out and he's pitched this idea for a 5-point try suggestion, Scott. So do you want to run us through that and your thoughts on it? Because you quite like the idea.
Yeah, so Andrew Johns has come out and basically said he'd like to see 5-point tries as a thing for tries started from within a team's own 40-metre zone. And I actually don't hate it. I think, I know Ethan's shaking his head here, but I don't hate it at all. I think it allows for an option for teams to attack out of their own end and to have a reward for that risk, because let's not beat around the bush here. There is a massive risk with starting a play from your own end and trying to throw it around and find a break. And I think it would add excitement to the end of the game if you've got a team up 6 points or 4 points even, and a team do have to score from within their own end to try and reverse the result and flip a game around in the last second. So I don't hate it. I understand that there'll be plenty of criticism around the idea, and it probably, let's be honest, it's probably never going to happen, but I don't hate it, Ethan.
Andrew Johns, one of the greatest ever halfbacks to play in NRL, rugby league, immortal, one of the greatest players I've ever seen watch, but no. Next question, please. We're not doing this. What's next? A 3-point field goal from 60 metres away? No, just leave it how it is.
Not to compare to AFL, but it would be like that very brief suggestion they had to bring the super goals in from the pre-season into regular season. I think it would be met with too much opposition from traditionalists that it just would never. I mean, I'm not totally against that type of lateral thinking, but I think it's probably a little bit too radical for most of the traditionalists.
Yeah, I would like to see it be brought in just to see everybody's heads explode. Just a quick one, Scott. So Blake Mozer's future is locked away.
Yeah, well, that's the report, isn't it? Broncos haven't come out and confirmed it yet, but the suggestion is that he has re-signed for another 2 years with the Broncos. That'll lock him in at Red Hill until the end of 2027. Great get for Brisbane. He's an absolute star in the making, Blake Mozer. I know he's missed the first part of this year through injury, and that's obviously not helping his cause, given that the radical change Brisbane are going under at the moment. But there's no question that Brisbane wanted to make him a retention target, and it seems they've now gone and done that. What that means for a few other players in the squad remains to be seen, I think. Both Corey Pay and Billy Walters, I think, are off contract at the end of this year. Obviously, Corey Pay was very much on the outer last year under Kevin Walters before Michael Maguire instilled him as the number one dummy half this year. And gee, hasn't he been good? He's been fantastic, Corey Pay. Talk is that he's going to re-sign as well. Potentially, you look at a 1-2 punch there with Mozer and Pay in the coming years. I think Billy Walters could be the odd man out. He certainly seems to have fallen down the pecking order under the coaching of Maguire this year. And so does that ultimately mean that he will leave the club at the end of the season? I think you could start to lean towards yes. But beyond that as well, just Brisbane's salary cap, we know there's some issues there. Adam Reynolds obviously will free up some cap when he does hang up the boots, whether that be this year or next year, or even if he's not in Brisbane next year. That seems like it could be an option as well. But Mozer is certainly on an upgrade. They've got some big deals floating around. Payne Haas is about to start negotiating his next deal. Patrick Carrigan's obviously locked in long-term. Reece Walsh is locked in long-term, and they're trying to do deals at the moment for Selwyn Cobbo and Katoni Staggs as well. So while Mozer was a retention target, it's just hard to understand exactly what it means for Brisbane moving forward, both in hooker and in other positions, given their salary cap. Ethan, I think just a quick one, actually, before we move on from Brisbane here. I mean, we understand that Brisbane are probably going to re-sign Katoni Staggs, but negotiations for Selwyn Cobbo have been quite slow off the mark. Do you see him staying in Brisbane, or do you see him finding a new home elsewhere?
Yeah, I reckon he'll stay in Brisbane. He loves it too much. I as much as the Roosters or another club will offer him a long-term, probably more lucrative, more expensive deal, I can't see him leaving. I'm not sure whereabouts he's from or he's back, his hometown. But from all reports, he won't move away from Queensland. He just loves it too much. But an interesting one now over the weekend. I think you covered it as well, Scott, so I'll throw this to Darren. Payne Haas linked to Manly. Can we see Payne Haas, the best front rower in the NRL at this stage, leave the Brisbane Broncos?
Probably not. Maybe, and obviously a few people are going to get linked to Manly now, but probably not. I get the feeling they'll move mountains to make sure that doesn't eventuate. But there is always a potential for Godfather deals. But yeah, my gut feel is I can't see that in the future.
Yep. Beautiful. So let's get to the round 5 preview now. We'll go around the table. So Ethan, what are you going to be paying attention to the most this weekend? Probably that Roosters Rabbitohs game, yeah?
Yeah, definitely the Ron Coot Cup. We got Latrell Mitchell back finally on the football field. How good is rugby league? Cannot wait to see him. It's going to be an interesting proposition to see him and Jai Gray both on the same field. I know for any listeners or readers out there, Scott wrote a great piece on Jai Gray over the weekend, so must check that out. Little plug for you, Scott. But getting back to the Ron Coot Cup, amazing game. South Rabbitohs always is. Always fire there. You've got players like Lenu playing. You've got players like Kalor Matungi playing. You know it's going to be a heated, fiery clash. On the other hand, for players to watch this round, Latu Fainu for the West Tigers, an absolute gun. I think he's only played three games of actual 80 minutes football. He's played more than 3 games, but taking his minutes into account, it's only 3 games of footy. An absolute workhorse, has the potential higher than any player in the NRL. You'll probably hear it from me before, and you'll hear it from me now, a bigger potential than Lachlan Galvin. So for the listeners out there, watch the Tigers this week against Brisbane. If Jerome Luai does get suspended, if he does take the early guilty plea by the match review committee, watch Latu Fainu. One of the best players you'll ever come across watching, and especially if he gets the opportunity to use that step of his and his attacking prowess.
And what about you, Scott?
Well, call me biased, but I've got my eyes keenly fixed on Saturday, 3:00, Dragons, Eels. Clint Gutherson's return to Parramatta. That's the storyline there, isn't it? I know it's probably not going to be the best game of rugby league. Parramatta are struggling. St George, I mean, they beat Melbourne, but it was a defensively dogged performance. But yeah, for me, the storyline there is Clint Gutherson back at home. The weather is supposed to be pretty good Saturday, Arvo. I think it'll be very close to a sellout at CommBank. It'll be a great atmosphere. I'm really interested to see what sort of reception Gutherson gets. Obviously, he's been a long time stalwart of Parramatta. I hope their fans don't go too hard at him. He probably doesn't deserve that. But yeah, I'm keen for that one. That's pretty much my weekend right there.
I'm looking at probably an obvious one, Storm and the Sea Eagles. Obviously, that's not till Sunday, but Melbourne Storm coming off a loss to then have a tricky away fixture. It's a key little test of their measure against good opposition. I'm also keen, was touched on a little bit by Ethan in terms of players to watch, but the biggest outsider of the entire round is the West Tigers, and they're a little bit better than that. Obviously, they could have won all 4 of their games conceivably, so Broncos should win that, but Tigers are better than the markets would suggest, so yeah, keen to see how they fare in that game.
Yep, absolutely. This season is absolutely firing at the moment. The Waz have the bye this week, so I'm going to be paying attention to a couple of those games that you guys mentioned. But we haven't talked about the Waz in about 2 weeks, and I just want to give a shout out to Halasima, who had maybe the greatest first try of all time in NRL history. I know I haven't been following it as long as you guys have, but I had to give that one a shout out. So thank you guys for coming on this week. It wasn't without its issues. We had a couple of technical issues throughout the podcast, so good luck to Jeremy, who's going to be editing this one. Scott, what do we have on Zero Tackle this week?
On Zero Tackle, just a quick shout out. Don't forget to get your tips in for round 5. People are loving our dynamic tipping competition. Unreal to see people getting around that. We'll have all the wrap up from round 4 across Monday and Tuesday. Teams at 4:00 on Tuesday afternoon. I'm expecting some judiciary hearings Tuesday night as well, so I'll be online for those, and then we'll get the run into round 5 going on a Wednesday morning. But yeah, definitely check out Zero Tackle for all the latest rugby league news.
Beautiful stuff. All right, thank you for listening. Thank you, Ethan. Thank you, Darren, and we'll catch you next week.